So Unit 7.1, Part 3, German Unification. We just finished watching Italy unify. And so we're going to, some of this will backtrack a little bit to catch up in years because we're kind of going by theme. We'd followed Italy and we'd seen what had happened in all places after the revolutions of 1848. So remember, we're in the age of realpolitik, so we are going to see some planners. Garibaldi will have been really our only romantic that we will see have some success in this unit. So the German unification is going to take place under the Hohenzollerns. If you remember, these are all the Friedrich Wilhelms guys that we had in our self-teach unit. I think that was, I don't know, was it Matt Omer's group, but that had the Prussians here. So we're going to see the Prussians leading the way after 1815. Prussia will emerge as an alternative to a Habsburg-based Germany. So meaning an alternative, that means we're going to push the Austrian Habsburgs to the side, and we're going to talk about how that happened. A little review here. In 1849, you remember that Austria had blocked the attempt of Friedrich Wilhelm IV of Prussia to unify Germany from above, and this was known as the humiliation of Olmütz. So if you remember, that we talk about how that humiliation would be dealt with again later. And then at this time, then, we're going to have two plans form on how to unify Germany. The first is the Grossdeutsch plan. So if you think about that, gross means total, like total product, and Deutsch means, you know, German, all of German. And so this is going to be, spoiler alert, our failed plan. But it was a plan at this time for unified Germany, including Prussia and Austria. But the events we're going to talk about, as I've already kind of alluded to, is going to be blocking Austria but allowing Russia to be the unified Germany. If you remember, where we left off is with the Zollverein, which was the German customs union. 1734, this was the biggest source of tension between Prussia and Austria because Austria was excluded. So if you think about how Germany begins to unify here, they're going to unify in the same manner that they kind of had done economically without Austria. And so this had been, we had some tension boiling. We're going to see Prussia and Austria kind of go at it again here. But really, the foundation of the unification of Germany is going to be an economic union, kind of similar to the European Union we're going to be coming up here when we get to modern times, where Europe will try to unite economically first, and of course we're running into some problems now, but we'll get there. So the second plan is the Klein-Dutch plan, and this is a unified Germany without Austria, and of course this is going to be our successful plan, as it's underlined here. It was seen as the most practical means of unification among various German states, particularly to Prussia, because it would put, of course, the Prussians at the lead, at the helm, at the control. And so we have a gentleman come on the scene, OVB, or Otto von Bismarck, one of our great Germans, and just an influence. 1810 to 1898, he is going to lead the drive for a Prussian-based Hohenzollern Germany. So this is where the Prussians are going to take the front seat, is with OVB, or Otto von Bismarck. He almost single-handedly unifies Germany like a chess player. He really can anticipate what's coming down the road and just sets the stage for that checkmate. You know, he's just an amazing mind. I mean, Cavour was a planner. Cavour was awesome. We talked about him. You know, I shared how I had respect for his planning and his ability to get things together, but OVB is just on a whole new level. He was a Junker, that's his background, and obsessed with power. And it is that obsession with power at which he is going to seek the king's favor. And he is going to, the king right now is Wilhelm I, who has replaced, you know, I will not take the crown from the gutter, Prussian Hohenzollern there. And so King William I is replaced, so Bismarck is going to gain the favor of this king in a time period called the Army Bill Crisis. There was a stalemate between the king and the legislature over reforms of the army. So, like, he wanted this many weapons built. He wanted this many taxes collected, the king being William. He wanted how long are the army terms. So there's a stalemate over what the king wants and what the legislature is willing to agree to. Now, our Constitution has some built-in clauses. If something like this is to happen, the president has veto power, but then even if the president vetoes something, 2/3 of the House can come back and get it, and then if the Supreme court thinks it's not constitutional, then it can go away. So there's all these things written in. The Prussian Constitution did not have these things, and so what Bismarck is going to step up and say, there's a gap there. It doesn't mention what is to be done if a stalemate developed. And since the king then grants the Constitution, Bismarck insisted that he could ignore the liberals, the middle class in the legislature, and follow his own judgment. Since he issued the Constitution, in the event of a stalemate, it should all come down to the king. So Bismarck very strategically is going to plan this in the king's favor. He is quoted for saying, "The great questions of the day will not be decided by speeches and resolutions." That was the blunder of 1848 and 1849, but by blood and iron, or by force. And this is where he kind of gets the nickname Iron Chancellor. And so he's going to say, like, you don't just talk, talk, talk and sit here in the stalemate. You get things done. Do it by force. You are the king. Might makes right. Might, M-I-G-H-T, makes right. So all of these things coming from Bismarck. So the government and then will continue to collect taxes even though the parliament had refused to approve the budget because Bismarck finds this gap in the Constitution. And this will oversee a number of reforms that will improve the Prussian military, which is going to become important pretty quickly because Bismarck, like Cavour, is going to poke, 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 and entice others into coming to war with him to get what he wants. So if you remember, there was an event that we spoke about just very briefly about taking some lands from Denmark, the areas of Schleswig and Holstein. We had talked about it was up at the top of the map. It's at the north between what would be modern-day Germany and Denmark. And Germany and Austria together, Germany, when I'm referring to that now, of course, the Prussians. Prussia and Austria had defeated Denmark and taken control of these provinces and had been jointly administering them. So Prussia and Austria have been sharing the administration over these provinces they had taken, but it's causing conflicts just a couple years later over jurisdiction that's going to lead to a major war between Prussia and Austria. And what Bismarck does is he takes this advantage of the tensions there, kind of lets them build up, just as Cavour had kind of poked Austria earlier into going to war with him for the unification of Italy. He's going to prod Austria into war with Prussia, and he is going to do this to try to get what he wants. He wants these lands. He wants to unify under Prussia. So very much that chess player, that planner. He's quoted as saying one must always have two irons in the fire. So there comes that Iron Chancellor thing again. But that you should have, like, over here this plan going and this plan going over here to support what you want to happen. And what he wants to happen is to have a unified Germany without having to worry about the Habsburgs butting in. And to keep the Habsburgs from butting in, he needs to get rid of Austria. So this is going to lead us to the Austro-Prussian War. It's a 7-week war, so very, very quick. Sometimes called the German Civil War of 1866, and so this is taking place just, kind of right after the American Civil War, and so we'll see the use of railroads and talk about that in a second as well. Okay, so the Austro-Prussian War, Bismarck had sought a localized war. Now, this is a plan. He wants to be at war, but he wants to keep it local, meaning he wants to keep other entities in Europe not involved so he doesn't have to worry about them. He just wants to get Austria out of the way so he can get the Habsburgs out of the way. So to do this, he makes diplomatic preparations for war with Austria by negotiating with France, Italy, and Russia for non-interference. So remember, after the Crimean War, we have Great Britain, like the Light Brigade, has lost its stomach to fight. They are staying off the continent. They are done for a while. They are going to stay out of affairs, kind of. This is where we're going to see edging towards World War I, almost too much staying out of affairs. They've lost their stomach to fight. The Russians have realized they can't fight. They're in the process, as we're going to see. You should stop in your review packet at the modernization of Russia. We're going to see that they're trying to step up their game. The Crimean War has shown them that. Plus, the Russians don't really like Austria right now because Austria, A, did not step in on their side on the Crimean War. B, was going to go against them in the Crimean War if they didn't give in to the 4 points there. And so we have that. And then Bismarck met with Napoleon III, who's worrying about Mexico at this point right now, kind of some of the colonial affairs of France. And so some issues there, and there's not really a record of what happened when they met, other than we know that France doesn't find themselves involved in this, so it must have went Bismarck's way. Something I mentioned just a minute ago is the use of railroads, which have been seen in the American Civil War, is going to be used here by Prussia to move mass troops. They will have a breech loading rifle, which has 5 rounds per minute, which I think the Austrians' guns only had 2 rounds per minute. We're going to see mass troops, meaning all of theirs are unified, where in Austria they're afraid of letting their troops of the same nationality or ethnicity, I guess you should say, kind of come together in case they would rise up against the Habsburgs. So they have a very divided army that doesn't work very well together. So all of these benefits of Prussia are going to allow Prussia to have a victory and unify much of Germany without Austria involved. So therefore, we see the Klein-Dutch plan, the plan where Germany would be unified without Austria. Just Prussia prevailed. Austria was given generous peace terms, however. So you have a decision here by Bismarck. Do you have a heavy hand and make them pay reparations, and even though you goaded them into war? And Bismarck's a thinker and a planner, and he might need to use Austria later. So he is very lenient with the terms, the peace terms of this victory. And the Italians, who I didn't mention with alliance here, who had just unified, of course, weren't going to step in to help Austria because Austria was still holding Venice at this time. So by them staying out of the war and not helping Austria, although I don't think they would have either way, are kind of given the little olive branch of Venice. And so that's where we complete the map, other than we complete the map of Italy when we're talking about the boot and everything being added there. So we get Venice from Austria at this point for Italy's unification. So up to this point, we'd had the German Confederation. Now it will be dissolved, and in 1867, we'll get the North German Confederation established by Bismarck with King Wilhelm I, or King William I as president. That is everything in the red color here on the map. This included all German states except for Baden, Württemberg, Bavaria, and Saxony, which are our southern states. They're kept autonomous, and the federal constitution will allow each state to retain its own local government as long as they recognize King William and Bismarck as chancellor. The parliament, or Reichstag, will be developed, and it will consist of 2 houses that share power equally. So an upper house, the Bundesrat, will include representatives from each state, and then the lower house, the Bundestag, will have representatives elected by universal male suffrage. And this new government structure is actually going to give Bismarck the ability to circumvent the middle class by appealing directly to the working class, just as Napoleon III had done in France, which is why Napoleon III's model is one we see repeated in Europe. He's able to bring the liberals in on his side, Bismarck that is. So the middle class in Germany, we'll see, won't really regain its influence until after World War I, which is where we're going to be heading. There's also some religious reason behind why it's the North German Confederation and the southern states didn't follow. The North, still from Luther, is Protestant, and the southern are Catholic, and they don't want to join Bismarck. But Bismarck wants the South, and as we've seen, Bismarck usually gets what he wants. So we're going to talk about how Bismarck is going to pull the South in while keeping 2 irons in the fire, also take care of Prussian German enemy, France. So just as Bismarck had prodded Austria into war to get what he wants, he is going to prod the French into war to equal the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 1871, which you can see lasts for the very long time period of 1 year. And so what Bismarck is going to do is to stir up the nationalism of his southern states, of the southern states that he wants to bring into the Northern German Confederation. So Bismarck is going to seek to provoke a war with France in order to further unify Germany. He also, though, wants Alsace and Lorraine, or German-speaking peoples, but have been with France for quite some time, so identified themselves as French. So he wants those territories as well as the South. So being the planner, Bismarck is going to take advantage of an ambassador of France coming to meet with King Wilhelm I. And he's an ambassador. So he's going to be very diplomatic. He's a diplomat, and he's going to meet in Ems, which is why this is called the Ems Dispatch. He'll meet in Ems with King Wilhelm I, and he'll say, hey, the one thing France is really worried about is, can you promise me a whole Hohenzollern will not take the throne of Spain? Because then if you think about France's situation, they'd be sandwiched between a whole Hohenzollern Empire and Germany. Guess I can start to call it Germany now. It's going to be Germany in a minute. And then a whole Hohenzollern on the throne in Spain, and they don't want that. And Wilhelm I, by all accounts, says back very politely, no, I cannot promise it's going to happen, although I'm not moving towards that right now. So everything was pretty diplomatic. But what Bismarck does is he sends out a dispatch, which would have been a telegram at this time, and rewords what happens. He boasts that the French diplomat had been kicked out. Like, so he asked for this, and the king kicks him out. No, you don't talk to me like that. After asking him not to interfere with the succession of the Spanish throne. So this alleged snub was exaggerated by Bismarck intentionally in order to provoke France. So it's that poking again. Poke, poke, poke. How many times can I poke you before you'll hit me in the face? Bismarck has been quoted as saying that this was like when a matador waves a red cape in front of a bull. So does a matador expect that bull to charge? Yeah, in fact, he wants it to. And so this is what Bismarck was doing to France. Just like, he's a genius. and just as he planned, as an infuriated France will declare war against Germany. And Bismarck is going to use this war with France to bring the 4 remaining southern German states into the North German Confederation: Bavaria, Baden, Württemberg, and Saxony. And so it works. They're like, oh, yeah, we can't let those French stomp all over the Germans. And it sparks their nationalism and brings them in on the side of the North German Confederation. What's significant about this event is the apparent ease with which Prussia defeated France will send shockwaves throughout Europe. This is really, the French had maybe been right with that foreign policy of 500 years of trying to keep Germany ununified, because very quickly, there they are, knocking the French down in a very short amount of time. So Paris will fall to the Germans in January of 1871, and as I mentioned earlier, and no spoiler alert, when we were ending France in the Second French Empire, in Part 1, that Napoleon will be captured at this time, and this will end the Second French Empire of France. The battles of Sedan and Metz were particularly decisive in Prussia's victory, and it is here that we will see the Treaty of Frankfurt, which will end the Franco-Prussian War in May of 1871. So, Bismarck will pretty much just it's like cutting an appendage, take Alsace and Lorraine, put it in Germany, and the 4 southern states that had come willfully. And so he had treated Austria with some sensitivity, but here with France, he is going to be very harsh. There are going to be reparations. There are going to be all kinds of things put. There will not be an empire for Napoleon to come back to, and we're going to come back to France later and check in. But this will be the end of the Second French Republic here. So let's talk about the building then of the German Empire. So don't forget to color those maps in the back of your packet and be read up to the modernization of Russia. So here's just a map of the stage of the unification of Germany. The German Empire will be proclaimed on January 18th of 1871. So France's goal of always keeping Germany separated is now completely failed. Germany will now immediately become the most powerful nation in Europe. So in less than a generation, our chess player Otto von Bismarck, the OVB, has done what others kept apart for hundreds of years. King Wilhelm I will become the Emperor of Germany, and it will become Kaiser Wilhelm, which is taken, of course, from the term Caesar from the Roman Empire, just as Tsar was in Russia, and is another just kick in the face or salt in the wound. He will be crowned in the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles. Bismarck will become the Imperial Chancellor, and we will see the Second Reich. I'm sure you've heard the term Reich. We're going to see the Third Reich with Hitler, but Second Reich, if you didn't know, the First Reich in Germany happened with the Holy Roman Empire. So we're in the Second Reich. There won't be a Fourth Reich. We'll talk about the Third Reich coming up with World War II. So Bavaria, Baden, Württemberg, and Saxony will be incorporated into the German Empire at this time as well. And the German Empire's government was essentially the same federal structure established in 1866, and in reality the Reichstag had little power, the legislature had little power, as the German Empire became a conservative autocracy with the nobility allied with the monarch. And so that's kind of where we will leave with Germany. We're going to come back to Germany and France and all these places, just trying to get them up to the same time period. So that makes more sense to you. But we need to talk about, you can see on this map that we have a unified Germany without Austria. Okay, because the plan of Großdeutsch did not work out. It failed, and so Austria is out there. So we need to talk about the Austro-Hungarian Empire and what happens there. So I won't spend long here trying to keep it under 25 minutes for you because you still have the review video to watch. But the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which we have not called it that yet, is going to become the Austro-Hungarian Empire after the Austro-Prussian War because the Austrian government had to address national aspirations of its ethnic groups. So it's been beat down by Germany, but within the Austrian Empire, there's all these ethnic groups fighting for their own autonomy. The Hungarians and Czechs will continue to demand self-determination, or at the very least for a semi-autonomous state. And then again, Austria's defeat by Germany in 1866 had weakened its grip on power and forced it to make a compromise and establish the so-called dual monarchy. And that's just the time period of the dual monarchy that you have seen in your reading. Remember, the emperor of this time was Emperor Franz Joseph. We talked about him in 1848 with the revolutions because he's going to rule from 1848 to 1960, and he will be our last Habsburg ruler of Austria. And so this compromise that's going to be made is Augsburg, or compromise is what this means. This is a vocab term of 1867, and it will officially create the Austro-Hungarian Empire, so we'll begin to call it that. The Hungarians under this compromise will now have their own assembly, cabinet, and administrative system, but would have to support and participate with Austria in the imperial army and the imperial government. So what are the results of this? Austria is going to assimilate the Hungarians or Magyars and nullify them as a primary opposition group. So we'll take care of some of this ethnic tension. But who does this come at the expense of? Really, our Slavs. There are a ton of Slavs in this area, and they are not going to have any of this like autonomy. It will lead to a more efficient government. And managing the empire, the government was not integrated due to difference among ethnic groups. The biggest probably tension they had is on what language would be used in government and school. In Bohemia, the issue of whether schools should use Czech or German language will become sticky, but they'll eventually come to the terms of using German. Universal male suffrage will not happen until 1907, and at this time period, growing in the background is some anti-Semitism that will become profound in Austria. No surprise that Adolf Hitler, who will be born in Austria, will have some serious dislike of the Jews because of the growing anti-Semitism in Austria. Jewish populations in Austrian cities had grown rapidly after Jews obtained full legal equality in 1867, make up 10% of the population by 1900, and their successes and things like that, there will be a lot of blame placed on them for economic things and corrupting German culture, and so we'll follow that as we move. Really, the last thing, just to reiterate, is the dual monarchy here with the Magyar rule in Hungary. And after 1871, the Habsburg leadership will lose the initiative to resolve the empire's important divisive issues, and we'll see that the Austro-Hungarian Empire will be progressively weakened and destroyed by it, and so we will come back to all of this in Unit 7.2 when we talk about the age of mass politics and what's going to go on there. But that is it. Unit 7.1 is finished. I'm going to put the Unit 7.1 review video right after this with some multiple choice questions, so please watch that as well and let me know if you have any questions. And finished under 25. So have a great extra, 2 days left of your break.